You're listening to WCOM LP 103.5 FM Carborough and Chapel Hill. It's a Tuesday, it's 5 o'clock, and that only means one thing. It's time for another round of Snarky Faith with your host, Stuart Deloney. This is a space where we irreverently wrestle through life, culture, and spirituality, all with our heads in the clouds, our tongues in our cheeks, our hearts in our sleeves, and our feet on the ground. At Snarky Faith, the questions or even the answers are never the point. It's all about the conversation. So here's your host, Stuart Deloney.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to another round of Snarky Faith Radio. I'm your host, Stuart Deloney. Welcome back for another week in the crazy dome of Christianity. Oh, goodness, folks. We've had a couple of nutty weeks. Well, actually, I think the crazy kind of got ramped up once Trump entered the scene as an evangelical orange messiah. So I can't say the past few weeks have been crazy, but maybe I could say they've been stormy. Wink, wink. Yeah. Oh, stormy on 60 Minutes. Boring, but funny all the way. So, what I want to do this hour, we're going to be talking about this, and it's been funny because it's been a phrase that I've been hearing tossed out, especially when we were talking about the Trump presidency. But I think it's very applicable to the church in general. And this has been something I've only been hearing, I don't know, lately. It's not like the phrase just popped up, but this has been something that people have been talking about, especially in this whole like fake news era, the term of gaslighting. So we're going to talk about gaslighting in Trump America, but really focusing more down on gaslighting and how the church does it consistently on a regular basis to its parishioners. But before we get to that amount of fun, what I've got to give you is really just kind of our rundown and Christian crazy for the week. First up isn't necessarily Christian, even though in many ways the GOP is the party of evangelicals. It needs to be noted that this happened last week. Illinois Republicans nominated Arthur Jones for a U.S. House seat. Now, for those of you that may not know Arthur Jones, and if you don't, it's probably a better thing. Yeah, because he is guess what? The former head of the American Nazi Party. And he ran the Republican nomination of Congress in Illinois' 3rd Congressional District. Mainly because no other Republican was willing to run, but he still ran and he still got the nomination. And on top of all this, fun things for being the former head of the Nazi Party, goes along with the idea that, he's a Holocaust denier. And assumably, you would recognize that he's anti-Semitic and he's a white supremacist. Sure. That kind of goes all in. It goes all in with the former head of the Nazi Party basket. But he got 20,339 votes from the Illinois Republicans. What? Yeah. I mean, I know this is a crazy show that's going on here in this race, and it really seems he has no chance of winning, but still, really? People are that diehard Republican to vote in a crazy... Wait, never mind. They did that for Trump. Okay. Never mind. I digress. But seriously, 20,339 Republicans in Illinois voted for the dude that was the former head of the American Nazi Party. I know I've repeated myself several times, but seriously, people, in this day and age, the fact that he could get one vote is insane. But we are living in the land of Trump craziness. And some other fun for the news. You know about the Austin bomber? We heard all this in the news, right? It was keeping our attention for at least a little while when Stormy Daniels wasn't. But the Austin bomber, who is in his confession tape had already said that he was an insane person, guess what? Let's look a little into his background. This comes from The Independent in UK. And Mark Anthony Condit, yeah, he reportedly took part in a conservative outdoors club called the Righteous Invasion of Truth, or Riot. What? Like, first of all, I love the idea that this is a conservative Christian group that calls themselves Riot, the Righteous Invasion of Truth. There's so much wrong even in the title. I don't even want to spend time on this, but this group, Riot, was for homeschooled. You stop laughing. It was for homeschooled young people who studied the Bible and were also taught gun skills. Really? So I'm not even talking about conservative evangelicals here. We're talking about like the wacky tobacco, like far out crazy ones. The conservative homeschool movement. Oh my goodness. Yes. So it's a group that encourages them to study the Bible and learn gun skills. How do those two mix? Not with logic or reality, but somehow they still did. Yes. That is and was a thing. And I'm not going to say there was a connection, but I'm not going to not say there was a connection to that. All right, next. And finally, in our rundown of crazy Christian news, this comes from an op-ed from the New York Times by Samuel Goldman. And what he begins to do, and the article is called "With the Embassy Moved to Jerusalem, a Biblical Trump?" And what he's beginning to break down in the midst of this is this idea, which he's not wrong, where American evangelicals are constantly looking for signs that Jesus is coming back. And what he'll assert in this, and I'll read a bunch of this to you, is that many evangelicals see that Trump is going to usher in the coming of the Messiah. Which, if you think about this like in terms of music, that would be like having the worst opening act with the best opening act. And typically in the history of the world, that doesn't really work that well. I'm not saying they're the best band ever, but I remember back when I was like in my early 20s, I went to go see U2, and the opening act was Smash Mouth. Yeah, the all-star Smash Mouth. And as we're all waiting there in the Georgia Dome, Smash Mouth starts playing, and they're about halfway into their first song, and they sound horrible. They sound terrible. The crowd begins to boo, and the crowd continues to boo and scream at them and hurl profanity and tell them to get off the stage for the rest of that, which they kind of finished their set, and there was this like awkward pause before U2 came out. And that'll be like forever in my mind, especially thinking about this idea that evangelicals who love King Jesus, and somehow Orange Messiah Trump is going to usher this in? What? Well, I'll start his article for you. For American evangelicals, there's a term of praise for President Trump that falls like a question mark on most everyone else. Quote, "You are a Cyrus." That's what the Christian pro-Israel activist Mike Evans promised to tell President Trump after his announcement that the United States would move his embassy to Jerusalem. Mr. Evans, who plastered Jerusalem with billboards praising the embassy's decision, isn't the only one to draw the connection with the ancient Persian king. In the 2016 book called God's Chaos Candidate, the minister Lance Wallano, you guys all know I can't pronounce last names, Wallano, asked, could Trump be God's Cyrus? So let me unpack what they're meaning about this, because there's a bunch of biblical terms that are wrapped up in all of this idea, because I've heard people call Trump the Old Testament David. I would say he's more of a Saul, but again, I do that more tongue in cheek because I don't like to try to make these kind of connections, but it's always funny when other people do. And Goldman here is is not pro this idea. He's just pointing out this phenomena here. Later in his article, he says King Cyrus, who is credited with allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem from the exile in the Babylonian Empire, represents the possibility that a non-believing leader and state could be used by God to reunite the chosen people and the promised land. The prominence of the Cyrus trope has revived fears about the religious influence on the United States foreign policy that have swirled around Republican presidents for decades. Ronald Reagan and George Bush were both accused of allowing their policies towards Israel to be influenced by interpretations of the book of Revelation, and that foresee the literal battle of Armageddon. So let me unpack this in evangelical speak. The evangelicals are waiting the return of Jesus, because it all really boils down to how you read the book of Revelation, but they are eagerly awaiting this. Ever since I was a kid, waiting and going to churches and conservative churches and stuff too, they would always talk about the signs and wonders. Oh, if the moon turns blood red, it's a sign. Watch for it. Watch for it. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming back. You just gotta be ready. And that's if you read Revelation absolutely literally. And what conservative evangelicals have done over and over again is try to find that. They're trying to find this a weird, and this is going to be a weird connection here, but this Da Vinci Code, this thing where you connecting, because again, evangelicals hate the Da Vinci Code, but this idea that you're connecting all these dots to point you to this kind of archaic thing that we're looking to in the skies, and eventually, boom, Jesus comes back. I mean, and I've heard this for time and time again, especially working for an evangelical organization, this idea that if we can finally evangelize everyone in the world, we will go ahead and force the Lord's hand and Jesus is coming back. This idea that somehow God's waiting around for people to push the right code or the right buttons and Jesus comes back, which really what that means is that we can continue to act not we, the evangelical world can continue to act like a bunch of just religious a-holes because that is their right. And we've talked about this way before too. The idea that in the Bible it speaks about Christians being persecuted. We see that there's legitimate persecutions of Christians that are happening in the world today. We see all these things happening, but in American culture, we need to feel persecuted too. So again, trying to replicate this biblical idea of Christian persecution, Christians run around acting like a-holes, and then people don't like it, and they're not nice to them, and they'll just scream, persecution, persecution, I'm doing this in the name of Christ. Yeah, and in the same right, what we're seeing is evangelicals trying to be able to connect this idea, and there's lots of other ones and other threads in the Bible that they've tried to connect to Trump, but essentially saying is that Trump is the bringer of the apocalypse, which on that line, I would wholeheartedly agree. Let's count the ways non-biblically that Trump may be the bringer of the apocalypse. Well, he's slashing regulations in the EPA. He is a climate denier. Trump has put into effect a tax bill that will continue to let the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, which will lead to some sort of thing down the line in America that's not going to be very pretty. We've seen this over and over again, especially throughout history with revolutions. We see this in the Russian Revolution. We see this in the French Revolution, where you get these rich oligarchs, they get more and more money, and everyone that's underneath them continues to get fed up, and revolution happens. Trump continues to want to act like a dictator and an authoritarian. We see all of this. We see Trump continuing to be Trump and trying to really become those authoritarians that he loves, which will only come at the cost of the idea of democracy. We'll see how far he can push it. We'll see if Republicans can grow a backbone in it. But speaking about Republicans and faith leaders that like to back them that have no backbone, let's hop into Robert Jeffress. Now, I know many of you listening out there may start to say, Stuart, you're not talking about your favorite man crush enough. Franklin Graham, I know. But don't worry, Robert Jeffress has not replaced Franklin Graham in that like hate area in my heart, that kind of that crush hate thing that I have going here. but he is kind of moving up very quickly. So let's listen to what he had to say, especially at this time period that we stand in right now. After weekends of rallies, of anti-gun rallies, and also moving towards Easter. Because of course, he'll have something wonderful to say. Oh, I can't wait to hear what it is. Let's listen. And I promise this interview doesn't come from Fox News. But wait, it does, which only makes it better. You want to make it even better? Like if you want me to like just double it, it's from Fox and Friends. This will be fun.
It is Palm Sunday, and tonight a group of Christians are planning to gather for the March for Eternal Life in Dallas, Texas.
It's the second year for the event, organized by our next guest.
Robert Jeffress. He's the senior pastor, of course, at First Baptist Dallas and a Fox News contributor. Good morning, Pastor. Happy Palm Sunday.
Good morning. Thank you.
And tell us, please, about the rally and the message we're going to hear.
Well, tonight, thousands of our members will march through the streets of downtown Dallas carrying a giant illuminated cross led by a Dixieland jazz band, proclaiming our belief that Jesus Christ is the ultimate hope for our country.
I'm sorry, wait a second. The band is marching, proclaiming Jesus Christ is the only hope for our country. And it's led by a Dixieland jazz band? What? Really? So are we back and saying the South is going to lead us into where? Wait, the South never leads us into anywhere good in America. Haven't you read your history books? And yeah, we don't want any kind of march for life. We only want to march for eternal life because it's off somewhere far in the futures, and we don't even know about it. But I'm sorry. I'm being condescending. I'm being snarky. I'll let him finish.
And of course, this comes on the heels of the March for Our Lives rally yesterday for gun control to end school violence. We don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's great. But if we're depending on legislation alone to solve the problem of gun violence, well, that's like putting a Band-Aid on a cancer. It doesn't deal with the root problem. The root problem is we need to change people's behavior, and that can only happen with a change of heart.
And conversion therapy if you're Mike Pence. Just want to throw it out there. Just want to kind of throw that out there. And I love how he's saying that this March for Lives that went on this weekend about gun control, blah, blah, blah. We really can't trust in legislation. We really need to trust in people's hearts. But wait, hold a second, Pastor Jeffress. Like, wait. But why are you backing Trump? Because you said before that you're backing him because of the legislation that he can pass to be able to fix America and mold America back into being a Christian nation? Wait, that doesn't make sense. And you're a prominent evangelical leader. Wait, hypocrisy, that never happens with you guys. But I'm sorry, I digress. I will let the show continue.
And we believe only the gospel of Christ can do that. So that's what we're doing tonight in a joyous, positive celebration.
So, Pastor, it's Palm Sunday. 2,000 years ago, Jesus Christ entered Jerusalem and palms were laid before him as he came in. Talk about the message of Palm Sunday. What does it mean?
Well, the message is, of course, he came and the people cried out, Hosanna, and they welcomed him. But they also, by the end of the week, crucified him. And yet, that wasn't a tragedy. It is the way through which we have eternal life and the forgiveness of sin. And we're proclaiming that truth, that God's forgiveness is available to anybody and everyone. It doesn't matter what you've done. Anybody who asks for that forgiveness can receive it.
Little pushback here again on that. What he says may sound nice, that the gospel of Jesus Christ is for everyone, according to the way they preach it. It's available to everyone who's willing to conform and fit into the Southern Baptist ideology. Otherwise, the gospel is not for you. Otherwise, the gospel tells you you're horrible and going to hell. Otherwise, the gospel has nothing to do with grace and love and compassion or anything else like that. But who am I to say anything? But a person who's also a pastor and was raised around that kind of crazy Southern Baptist ideology, I don't know.
I love when you talk about the troubling times we live in. The only way to really change things is to change people, to change their hearts, to make them better. What message specifically do you have for many people that are troubled, to help them change, to help them love more, to open their hearts.
So the message that she is searching for here to garnet out of him, to pull out of him, is simply this. You guys leave the NRA alone. And if we make all this issues about gun violence in America, if we make it all about the person's heart, then we don't have to take anybody's guns. We don't need to worry about gun control or background checks or legislations or all that kind of stuff. We can kind of throw that into the spiritual realm and the afterlife and do absolutely nothing.
Abby, I would remind people that for the last 70 years, there has been a crusade by secularists to remove any acknowledgement from God from the public square, including our schools, saying that we can be good without God. Well, that's been a dismal failure. I'd remind our viewers that for the first 150 years of our nation's history,
so since he's taken us on a history lesson here, please remind us that we had slavery, that women couldn't vote. Please tell us that, because that's back to the good old days of our country, right? Right? Is that? Come on, Robert, you're going to say, is that right? The first 150 years of our country, when we somehow acknowledged God publicly in the square, and God was somehow everywhere, because like Beetlejuice, if you acknowledge God, he's there. Yeah. And all the other human atrocities that were going on within our country, right? Not even mentioning Native American rights or anything else like that, too. So please, please, please tell us how everything was wonderful 150 years ago, Robert. I know you're going to do it. I know you're going to do it. Because when God was acknowledged, there was no problems in our country.
our school children prayed, they read scripture in school, they even memorized the 10 Commandments, including the commandment, thou shalt not kill. And yet about 60 years ago, the Supreme Court says that's unconstitutional. I think we need to return to that. Teaching people, starting with our children, that there is a God to whom they're accountable.
And this being a slight coded message to being able to say that we need to get back to that time where we believed in a white God, where white men had privilege and white men were respected, and anyone that wasn't a white man really didn't matter that much. But I'm sorry. Go ahead and continue your little spiel, buddy.
It's not the only thing we need to do to end gun violence, but it's the first thing we need to do.
Pastor, we've got about 30 seconds. I was just reading some of the tweets people watching the show, and one person said, I'm just tired of people out there bashing the president 24/7. We know you're a supporter of the president. What message do you have to these people who just bash him nonstop? But what message do you have to the president, your friend, about what he could do to bring the country together?
Oh, come on, Fox and Friends. I find it flattering you're using things like Twitter and People in the Nation saying things to dance around the fact that you're just talking about me. So, Robert, what do you have a message for me, particularly here at Snarky Faith? Me, Stuart, what do you want to tell me?
Look, he is doing an exceptional job. He has accomplished more in his first year than any president in history.
Oh, sorry. I got to catch my breath. You're right. Trump has done more than any other president in the history of our country for segregating and dividing us. And yeah, you all know the rest of this. Because history doesn't matter when you say someone has done more than anybody else in history, especially if you're saying it on Fox News.
And President Trump is the most faith-friendly president we've ever had, and that includes Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush. I would tell my friend, the president, to stay the course, keep moving forward. We love you, and we're proud of you.
All right.
And for that matter, keep being transphobic and racist and bigoted as hell. Keep banging porn stars and playmates. Just keep it up. This is what Jesus would want. What? That is exactly what it sounds like for someone to sell out their faith. We've gotten to this point. Anytime Robert Jeffress opens his mouth, you can just go ahead and say, ask yourself that question, what does it sound like when somebody absolutely sells out their faith? Well, just listen to Robert Jeffress. So on that note, we're going to go ahead and pivot over to the topic that I began with at the beginning of the hour. We want to be able to talk about this idea of gaslighting. And it's a term that I've heard used, especially in reference with Trump. Trump comes into the office, and you've got poor old Sean Spicy out there having to shovel the loads of crap that the president was saying and somehow back it and say that it's true. Like, we began this whole thing. This whole thing began with the size of his inauguration. And we all know his inauguration is tiny and was a yawn worthy if you were Stormy Daniels and pretty much every other woman that's ever been in his life. Yes, let's not talk about inauguration size anymore, but gaslighting is an instance that happens when someone manipulates you into questioning your reality. Now, the term was phrased from a 1944 movie and a play. And when we begin to talk about gaslighting, it's this thing that I feel like is so connected to that term, fake news. It's when you begin to see things with your eyes, but someone else continues to tell you over and over again, that's not true. But you're like, but I see it's true. It's not true. Let me tell you, it's not true. And here's the truth. So it's this perpetuation of lies. But it's not that simple. It's this manipulation of reality to people. We've seen the Trump administration do it over and over again. We've got Sarah Sanders Huckabee that has really made an entire career out of gaslighting the American public. Now, thankfully, a lot of us hear her searching for a word that the FCC will let me use. Crap that she continues to shovel on America, that she continues to tell us that what we're hearing and what we are hearing people accuse the president of, we're hearing other senators and legislators come out and say the president is doing this. This is bad for our country. And we continue to hear Trump's backers over and over again tell us that's not true. No, you're getting your facts. You're getting your news from fake news sources. Because the best place to find all of your news in America is not through journalists who have been through school and have ethics, and also noted that all of the major publications, if you want to say fake news to CNN, MSNBC, and everybody else, guess what? They have lawyers because they don't want to get sued for having fake news and for pushing out fake ideas. And so this idea and journalistic integrity that has continuously been cut back and undercut in our country for this idea of fake news, that there is real news and only we, the conservatives, we, the evangelicals, understand it. And we continue to hear these things like, don't listen to the mainstream media. It's bad. It's untruthful. They're lies. That is a symptom of gaslighting, when you're continuously telling people, don't listen to what other people are saying. Don't listen to what you are seeing happen in the world today, in our communities today. Don't believe it. Or especially when it comes to things like climate change, don't believe any of the things that scientists say, because scientists don't love God. They love these things called facts and science. So don't listen to facts and science. Listen to us, the uninformed, because we will tell you what's real. We will tell you what to believe, and we will help construct your reality. And that is a very scary place to be in. And I could easily spend the rest of the show talking about how the Trump administration has been gaslighting the American people, or at least attempting to. But that's not that interesting, because those that would probably be listening to the show already know this. But I want to dig into something a little bit deeper, because when you begin to pull the thread, so you start pulling the thread on Trump, right? And that leads in many ways to the conservative evangelicals. The conservative evangelicals that had it was 80% of the conservative evangelicals that voted for Trump. Now, how is that even possible? How is it possible that people would proclaim to follow a compassionate, loving Jesus, a Jesus that consistently reached out to the marginalized, a Jesus that had no love for money but had an enormous compassion and a huge well of grace for those in this world, especially those that are suffering and forgotten? That Jesus. How in the world could evangelical voters continue to follow this narcissistic Trump? Well, pull that thread a little further, and you're going to start to see a culture of gaslighting in the American church. Because it wasn't simply that this gaslighting began when Trump ended up on the political platform here. No, it didn't begin there. It didn't begin there because churches have been using gaslighting for centuries on their congregation. It is a way to be able to control people. If you control people's perspective of reality, you control the person. Especially if you say that you are speaking for God. Now, I feel like the next thing I'm going to say makes me sound very like high school research paper 101, but I actually enjoyed Wikipedia's definition of gaslighting. And gaslighting is a form of psychological abuse in which false information is presented with the intent of making a victim doubt his or her own memory and perception. It may simply be the denial by an abuser that the previous abuse incidents ever occurred, or it could be the staging of bizarre events by the abuser with the intention of disorienting the victim. So make no mistake, the whole purpose behind gaslighting is controlling whoever your victim is, even if your victim is a congregation or voting bloc. Hello, Republicans. Hello, NRA. And one of the reasons I thought about even talking about this week wasn't specifically Trump, even though that's why I've heard this term kind of come back into the cultural consciousness recently. But it really came to mind when I was reading articles about Willow Creek Church's senior pastor / founder. He's not senior pastor right now, but was their senior pastor and founder, Bill Hybels, who's been accused of a pattern of sexual immorality over and over again. Now, it would be easy to go ahead and kind of doubt some of this because that's what Christians do. Typically, when accusers come forward, the doubt is on the accuser and not on the holy man of God. But as I've been reading through, the Chicago Tribune did a great piece on this. And even surprisingly enough, I'll give some props to Christianity Today for actually profiling this piece as well. Usually they're not crackerjacks of journalism, especially when it comes to some of the bigwigs, I guess, in the Christian industrial complex. But I did appreciate both parties beginning to bring this story out. And I'm not in here to crucify or to defend Bill Hybels in anything, but you begin to see this pattern that goes on, especially in Christian circles. And what really stuck out to me about Bill Hybels is that there were many prominent members of their elder board that were actually speaking out against him, saying, yeah, this kind of makes sense. Yeah. And the rest of the elder board, which I will note, member of the Willow Creek Elder Board is Betsy DeVos's husband, who was in favor of not speaking out or speaking poorly against Bill Hybels or really kicking him out. So, there were a lot of other prominent people. I know Karen Powell from Fuller Seminary. I know John Ortberg and his wife as well, too. They have been speaking out against this. And their pursuit was simply just, let's do a non-partial investigation into finding out what's happening. Now, from what I've read, at the time, Willow Creek has done their own internal evaluation of what's gone on and found that Hybels was not at fault. Now, I'm not even going to try to get into the politics of all of this, or even to like just the personality struggles of in all of this, but there is a pattern of this happening in other churches. If anyone wants to follow Mars Hill and Mark Driscoll and all the abuses that went on there, we can go back to PTL and Jim Bakker and all the abuses that went on there, and many, 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 many other situations. And we begin to see this. We begin to see this gaslighting that goes on within the Christian church. And it's easy to point out the bigwigs, the big ones. You know, the Willow Creeks, the Mars Hills, the PTLs, all those ones. It's easy to point out those because they're easy to throw stones at. But on smaller levels, this happens in churches all the time, where the accuser isn't believed, which again continues to add to this gaslighting, and the pastor is allowed to stay in power. Why? Because the pastor has spun this kind of a culture around the church to where he is the holy man, he knows what's right. And anyone that's attacking him is really attacking God and Jesus and attacking the power of their ministry. And it is sickening when that happens. And some of the things that you can begin to see in these situations are these conversations, especially with keeping victims quiet. These things end up being very secretive. They end up being very manipulative, and those that are set to defend the pastor and defend the ministry end up being very divisive in how they're doing stuff. And guess what, Snarky Faith, folks? I'm even going to give you situations where I was around some gaslighting as well, too. And I'm not talking about like the youth ministry gaslighting where someone would light a flame when someone farted. No, I'm talking about situations working in a large church where I was able to see this. I'd been hired into a large church in the Pacific Northwest, won't name names, as a youth pastor. And as some of you have heard me say this before, and this was one of those things where when I was hired in to be their youth pastor, I was never told, and I found this out on the ground within the first month of being there. And I was too young and naive and or arrogant and stupid, which kind of go hand in hand with arrogant and, with being naive, that I was, first of all, the 7th youth pastor they had in 7 years. Now, I didn't find this out when they were hiring me. I thought I asked all the right questions. I had not. But I began to work in this staff that, as I began to look at them, everybody was very beaten down and submissive. Meaning that if I ever asked questions like, why is this done this way? This doesn't seem quite right. They would just be like, no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Because they, I mean, whether it be through the idea that they wanted to keep their jobs or they had bought into this idea that somehow they were doing God's will, had been completely submissive and completely complicit to the sins that were going on within the church. And it wasn't until I had one of my good friends who I had hired on to be part of the staff, which was a total godsend to me because he also wasn't from that culture. And he also saw the insanity that was happening. He also saw the celebrity worship that was going on within the church. And he also saw all this. I would ask him questions. He'd say, yes, this doesn't make any sense. And I remember this. I got to the point eventually where I ended up just telling the pastor, I was like, listen, we're at an impasse within all of this. None of this makes sense to me, and I'm not going to change for you. So really, you're going to need to fire me, which, of course, as any good boss would do when you give him an ultimatum when you're in your 20s, he fired me. But I remember I was going through some counseling afterwards because it was crazy because it was a kind of situation where up is down and black is white and all this other kind of stuff where you've just been told all of this and everyone within the church knew all of this. And even like the way the pastor had become the pastor of this church, he had literally defamed and stolen the church from his father. And I had friends in the church that actually knew this and kept going to the church. And they kind of just brushed it under the surface because they loved being involved with this thing that seemed upbeat and positive and fun, as long as you ignore all of the weird stuff that happens in the darkness. And I was going through some counseling with a friend, and I'd been telling him what was going on. He said, okay. He's like, okay, I'm going to do this for you, but don't tell anyone about this. And this is years ago, and he's fine with me telling this now, so I'm not totally a breach of trust here. So I'm sitting in his office during one of our sessions, and he dials someone up on the phone. And he'd apparently already set this guy up for this phone call for a session. And he said, tell this person on the phone, I won't tell you who it is, which I later found out who it was, but because we also became friends. But he says, tell him everything that you're saying. Tell him everything that you've seen, everything you're saying, and all that you're feeling. And so I do this. I go through all of this and talk about all the weird manipulation and all just the weird craziness and how like my reality had been kind of just pushed and questioned. And, I had all sorts of self-doubt. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's all right and all this stuff. And so I go through all this. And the guy at the end of the phone just tells me, you're right. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, no, you're not crazy. Everything that you're saying is absolutely right. And I was like, how do you know this? He's like, because I used to work there. I used to work there, and I needed to get out for my own health, for my own spiritual health, for my own sanity, and for my family. Because everything that's going on in there is wrong, and it's twisted, and it's messed up, and it's sick. And I'm not saying I was fully gaslit. I'm not really sure how that term goes, but for me, hearing the truth from somebody else, hearing somebody else talk about their experiences and that I wasn't crazy was all the difference in the world to me. And I say all that to get to this point that I'm wanting to say is that there are too many churches in America that are gaslighting their congregations. And on some level, it's not Christianity's fault. And on some level, Christianity is ripe for manipulation within all of this. I mean, think about it. Just the basis of Christianity, the basis of spirituality, the basis of faith is that you're pointing people to something higher. You're pointing to people something that isn't here, that isn't of this world. You're talking about spiritual matters. You're talking about things that were way in the past. You're talking about God. You're talking about Jesus. You're talking about all of these things that in a certain realm are concepts. They're not stuff that we can always see on a piece of paper. And I'm not talking about your Bibles. But when we talk about experiencing these things, and this ends up being one of the issues that I know a lot of times people that are atheists and scientists will push back against religion and faith and spirituality, is the fact that in religion, in science, we're able to have tangible data, and in faith and spirituality, you don't. Now, I'm not arguing that that is inherently a bad thing, because the whole realm of faith and spirituality does involve dealing with things, wrestling through things in your life that aren't seen. But in the same breath, when you're dealing with things that aren't seen, when you're dealing with a God that doesn't always speak, it creates a scenario that is ripe for manipulation. Especially if the pastor / charlatan is charming and smooth and has a persona that engages people. Now, I'm not saying all churches do this. I'm not trying to paint this as an all-encompassing claim against American Christian churches. What I am saying is that it happens more than you realize. And from an article from Psychology Today that was written by Dr. Stephanie Sarkis, is that she goes on, and now what she's doing is here, not completely in my context, but she's kind of outlining these ways to be able to see what it looks like if someone, an individual, is gaslighting you, but I think it totally applies to the church at large. So first one is they are telling blatant lies. She says, you know an outright lie, yet they are telling you this lie with a straight face. And why are they so blatant? Because they are setting up a precedence. Once they tell you a huge lie, you're not sure if anything they say is true, and it keeps you unsteady and off kilter is their goal. Now think about this. Evangelicals like to tell you this, and they don't say it completely this succinctly, but they do in so many words, that somehow giving your life to Jesus will fix everything, right? You'll bring up testimonies of people. I was a prostitute. I was addicted to heroin, and now I have Jesus, and I'm all better now. Nothing in life is that simple. Now, I'm not saying that God doesn't have power, but I am saying when you begin to see these tangents, I was this, now I'm this, look at these results, it almost feels like an infomercial. You know, I was 350 pounds overweight. I took these pills, and after a month, look at me now, I'm ripped. And so often we've boiled down the gospel, we've boiled down Christianity to these kinds of claims. Claims that, in a certain sense, prey on the weak, prey on those that are in painful situations, prey on those that are susceptible to guilt, because we all know the church never uses guilt to manipulate people, right? Right? Right. But we begin to see this spinning of things that somehow don't make any tangible sense. But we're told, because they're spiritual, because they involve God and things from above, that we need to believe them. And why? Faith is all about, as some will tell you, believing something that makes absolutely no sense. Now, don't believe me? Look at like the prosperity preachers. The only reason you're not being blessed is because you're not given to us. It creates a psychological situation where they have power over you and they continue to tell you what you want to hear and continue to get things from you. Number 2 on their list from Psychology Today, they deny they ever said something even though you have proof. You end up being around deniers. I was around deniers in that. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. That never happened. You begin to hear those kind of things. And again, that begins to make you doubt yourself. Number 3 is they'll use what is near and dear to you as ammunition. They may tell you, oh, if you leave the church, what about your children? Do you not care about their spiritual lives? Do you not care about this? If you were a good person, you would care about your children's spiritual lives. Or they begin to say, oh, what would people in the church say about you? They're your friends, right? They'll leave you. And the sad thing is, when people do leave churches, they do lose their friends. But were they friends to begin with if they're willing to leave you just because you leave a church? Number 4 on the list is they wear you down over time. They wear you down over time. And what happens, especially in the church, is also what wears you down is groupthink. People want to continue to follow what the messianic leader is telling you over and over again. And you may have questions, but the other people that are around you with the herd mentality, they'll say, oh, don't say that. Don't think that. That's not spiritual thinking. That's not good for you. Number 4 on the list, and this really hits home with especially a lot of these like kind of prosperity preacher types. Their actions do not match their words. And this is like one of those first and foremost credos of leadership is this. You can't expect your followers to go where you're not willing to go. So if you see leaders that are asking more of their followers than the leader is willing to do, that should be an alarm that goes off in your head. Number 6 on their list is they'll throw positive reinforcement to confuse you. They will cut you down, but they will also say nice things at the same time. Ever had that happen to you? Mm-hmm. Oh, I think that the devil is speaking through you. There are things in your life, maybe there's sin that you don't even know about, uncovered sin in your life. You may be sinning and not even knowing it, but I know you're a good person. Again, what does that do? Throws you off kilter. Number 7 on that list is they know confusion weakens people. Number 8, they project. They will consistently project onto you. Because why? It'll make you start to defend yourself. And once you're starting to try to defend yourself, you're going to be distracted. Distracted away from the things that you're actually accusing them of doing. And number 9, and I have seen this, they will try to align people against you. The great move of any good manipulator is to align people against you so you feel outnumbered. So why? So you stay in line. You continue to be part of the crazy. And then, as she continues here, they will start to find ways to defame you. If they can't manipulate you anymore, they're going to start spreading discord so that you begin to get pushed out of the flock. So you have less credibility, so people don't believe you, so your friends turn on you, and this is the way that churches do that to you. I think it's good to be noted again here that I'm not saying all churches do this, but I am saying a stinking lot of them do that. And it all comes down to this. It becomes of the way that we have structured churches nowadays, where you have one power person that is the shepherd, the pastor, the preacher, the reverend, the prophet, whatever you want to call him. Those type of people hate accountability, and they like their voice, their version of God, to be pushed onto the masses without ever being questioned. And it's not really a biblical stance for community. a Christian community at all. Pastors aren't meant to be CEOs. Sorry, American church, it's not biblical. And I know people will push back by saying, but the word pastor's in the Bible. Yes, but the church has redefined it for their own power structures. It's not meant to be that way. Like when you look back to the church, it's more of a level playing field of hierarchy where people aren't greater than the other, where some people are good at this and other people are good at that. So, in closing this hour, here's what I want to remind you of how to resist this. And this comes from Ariel Lev, who wrote this article in The Guardian, How to Survive Gaslighting When Manipulation Erases Your Reality. She said, remain defiant. And that's not a word Christians like, to be defiant. And I'm not talking about being defiant against God. I'm talking about being defiant against those that are evil in positions of power, especially in the church. Her other thing is recognize that there may never be any kind of accountability. Christians tell us, and the Bible tells us, we're supposed to kind of move towards reconciliation and accountability. But guess what, folks? Sometimes you just need to cut bait and leave. That is the healthiest thing spiritually and psychologically for you. Sometimes there is no reconciliation in these situations. You need to be willing to let go and leave. And her last suggestion was this, is develop a healthy detachment. Is to realize that you were in a cult-like situation where nothing made sense. And it was not your fault. It was not your fault. It's not your fault that you wanted to be connected with God. It's not your fault that you wanted to follow your spiritual path. It's not your fault that you wanted to be everything for Jesus. You just need to realize in your healthy detachment that wasn't Jesus. That wasn't at all. It was sick and it was twisted. And the best place that God wants you is outside of that church. So I hope some of this was edifying for you. I hope some of this may have helped you get out of situations that are toxic and are damaging and are not spiritual at all. They are just simply abuse. And even if people would say it's abuse in the name of God, I would say it's just abuse. Take the name of God out of it. God has nothing to do with it. People may use the name of God, they may use the name of Jesus, but it has nothing to do with the loving and compassionate and graceful God that is. Don't let those abusers make you think otherwise. Because I will tell you, most of my experiences with God, most of my rich spiritual experiences, mainly all of my rich spiritual experiences, have been outside the church. I've been on my own path when I walk with God. I've been on my own path as I walk with others. And I find a richness outside the gaslighting and the power structures. And that is healthy. And I would also say that is pretty darn Jesus ordained. And you may be in a healthy church, then great. But if you're not, for your own health, for the health of those around you, get out. Well, that's all I've got this hour. And thank you so much for listening and being a part of this journey that we are doing here at Snarky Faith. As we end this broadcast, just a reminder that you can catch us on podcast at www.snarkyfaith.com. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter if you want to reach out and tell me I'm a heretic or pat me on the back or suggest things to talk about on the show. I am open to all of those. You can email me at questions@snarkyfaith.com. snarkyfaith.com. Also, if you want to be on the ins, you can go to our website, www.snarkyfaith.com, and sign up for our newsletters that we send out on a regular basis. But that is all I have got this hour, and I send you out with grace and peace and an ample amount of snark. Just enough to keep you dialed in, awake, and safe in this crazy world that we live in. I'm out of here.
WCOM is listener-supported community radio, and Snarky Faith is only possible through our sponsors. Lumen, a spiritual community of seekers, sojourners, question askers, doubters, and skeptics, is a collective of fellow travelers that embrace the truth that all of life is sacred, hope is real, and tomorrow can be a better day than today. All are welcome. You can find more information at www.lumencommunities.com.